I feel like I've crashed a Minnijean reunion, but I'm happy to be a part of it. My name is Janice F. Kearney, and I am an Arkansan. I live here in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I'm going to be the moderator tonight for the conversation on a legacy of resistance, an intergenerational conversation about activism. And I want to say that these two ladies who are talking with us tonight are people that I admire so very, very much. I mean, they're icons. Minnijean, you have been someone I've admired from afar, way before you knew me. And Spirit is your shadow. And that's not a bad thing, Spirit, because you are following in her footsteps so beautifully. And you seem to have just drank up everything that she's taught the rest of us, the rest of the world. So I'm just so happy to be here tonight. And thank you, Kurt and Shannon, for asking me to do this. It's an honor. Before I introduce Minnijean Brown Tricky and Spirit Tawfiq, and I probably got your name wrong, and I'm sorry, Spirit. I'd like to give a shout out to our host, the UA Pulaski Tech College, and the sponsor, the Little Rock Central High School National Historic Site, who, if you haven't been to the Central High School Museum, you should get there because it's an amazing piece of history that helps explain Arkansas for people who aren't Arkansans. And they do amazing work throughout the year. Let me introduce Mrs. Minnijean Brown Tricky, who has a lifelong experience and commitment to peacemaking, environmental issues, developing youth leadership, anti-racism education and training, cross-cultural communication, and gender and social justice advocacy. She is, as most of us know, one of the 9 African-American students, commonly known as the Little Rock Nine, who collectively resisted opposition to the desegregation of Little Rock Central High School in 1957 with the protection of federal troops. And with her tonight is Mrs. Spirit Tawfiq. Spirit is an anti-racism educator and founder of Roots of the Spirit, an organization created to uproot racism through storytelling, education, and the arts, which I love all of those. She's the creator and host of Roots of the Spirit podcast, a space to galvanize change through honest conversations about identity, race, racism, and intersecting social justice issues. And they are here tonight out of their very, very busy schedules to talk to us about intergenerational activism. And I want to start out tonight by asking both Minnijean and Spirit this question. In 2021, we are celebrating National Black History Month. In 2021, what does Black History Month mean to you?
You go first or me? Well, okay. Black History Month, of course, was started by Carter G. Woodson many years ago, and he thought that Black people should know about their histories, which was really important because in the sort of United States, Black history gets put in the back of the book or has a paragraph here or there. And he felt that Black people needed to know their own history. Now, what does it mean to me? It means we get to share all these histories across cultures, across class, color, and all that. And most of the time, we don't really know too much about people until they pass away. I can't tell you how many people said, oh, I didn't know John Lewis did all that until he died, which is really unfortunate. So we end up trying to help people understand both the presence of Black people in this particular North American place and the contributions, but more, in my opinion, to help children understand so that they don't grow up and continue the same old craziness that people have done for a long time. Right now I'm an elder, but I can remember a time when I thought, well, when all these old people are gone, everything will change. I'm glad I'm still here and I'm still mad at the old people, so okay.
Yes, we still need you. Spirit?
Well, I have a love and not so loving relationship with Black History Month because growing up, Black History Month, I have vivid, beautiful, warm, celebratory memories of Black History Month. Especially as I was coming of age in Ottawa, Canada, because my brother Isaiah kind of introduced me to Black History Month. Interestingly enough, and we'll talk about this in a bit, it's not as though I grew up learning my mother's story. So interestingly enough, Black History Month actually helped introduce my own mother and her role in history to me.
Wow.
So I just remember this just beautiful celebrations through music, through assemblies at school, through stepping, just a very beautiful multicultural event that we had. But it also reminds me that Black history is American history. And until we can actually weave it, until it's actually woven into the fabric of American history, we need to remind people of the importance of Black contribution to this nation. So, like I said, it holds a special place in my heart, but it also reminds me of how far we still have to go.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Wonderful. So, Minnijean, I'd like to ask you to give us your definition of intergenerational activism and why is it important that we have intergenerational activism moving forward? And would you talk a little bit about Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, their movements, whether there was indeed intergenerational activism during those times?
One of the problems, I think, if we talk about Malcolm X and Dr. King, is they didn't live long enough to be elders.
Mm-hmm.
They were cut off in the prime of their lives. And that's really important. Intergenerational means, in my opinion, I don't tell any young activists what to do. And I am very careful about that. If I'm asked for help, I'm willing. My favorite group to talk to happens to be, I'll say, 5th grade kids, but I because they're open, thoughtful, have a strong sense of what's right and wrong. And so I spend as much time with young people.
Great, great.
As possible way of interacting with young people. I'm forming images of Little Rock so I can go in as a grandmother and have acceptance my kids. And I really feel that that's where my responsibility lies, is to impart for the newer generation truth and get them to thinking before they're sort of persuaded by so many forces to forget and lock themselves into, I guess, just not thought. So that's always my challenge. And some of you know that I have been part of 10,000 high school and middle school kids on Sojourn to the Past. And those of you who know Sojourn, I consider that activism because I say, I brainwash them when they're young, right? And, but also, and I don't want to take too much time, encouraging young people who are doing things. You know, I have discussions with young people all the time. I've heard the expression, this movement is not our ancestors' movement. And I say to people who think that, oh no, it's a continuation. And as long as we think of activism as a continuation and don't come and reinvent the wheel for every social justice activism that we participate in, I think we would be really useful to each other.
Wonderful. I'm going to skip around a little bit. So Spirit, I have a question for you. Tell us what it was like growing up with a mother who was a national treasure and a global icon. In your eyes, was she mother first? Was she the civil rights icon whose role began back in 1957? How did she, as a young mother and activist, model the kind of activism that is now so much a part of who you are and who she is?
I love that question. So as I alluded to earlier, I really didn't grow up with my mother being considered a global icon. Like, she was our mother, she was taking care of her 6 children and farming. And so of course I looked up to her in that way. But the funny thing is, even though she never sat us down at a young age, and when I say young, it was like 7th grade before I ever learned my mother's story, she modeled activism in so many different ways. And when I think about it, it's amazing to think of the scope of activism that she modeled. So, I mean, in 1987, that's the very, very first time that I ever remember hearing anything about the Central High desegregation crisis. And ironically, it's a really funny story, but I'll condense it. We were actually at the governor's mansion when President Clinton was governor, and he was honoring the Little Rock Nine for the 30th anniversary. So my little sister Layla and I, and Ellen, who was here with us, and our entire families went to the governor's mansion for this celebration. And we had no idea what we were there for. I was 7 years old. And Chelsea Clinton, unbeknownst to me, I had no knowledge of who she was or context to put it in at such a young age, and being a Canadian. But she actually explained why there was a celebration at this mansion that we were at. So that kind of sat as a placeholder. I didn't really recall it until years later when President Clinton was elected president, and my mother was like cheering upstairs in our Canadian home in Ottawa, and she kind of built context and drew that understanding for me. But that was the very first time. Right. Second piece of that story that I remember is watching Eyes on the Prize as a young person, and my mother doing a talk. But we were kids, and Eyes on the Prize just didn't hit it, and so it didn't really penetrate me in the way that it did a few years later in about the 7th grade, when Malva Patillo Beal's book Warriors Don't Cry came out, the very first personal testimony of the Central High crisis. Here there was a scholastic book on our shelf that depicted my mother's story. And then after that, there was a Disney movie, the Ernest Green story. And I think the pinnacle in my life was when my mother was invited to be on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and I was just a regular high school kid. That was really exciting, but then things continued to evolve from there. However, I do think it's important to note that there are other events that really stand out in my mind. Like when I was in the 2nd grade and we lived in Toronto, Canada, my mother had us marching down the street saying, "Free Mandela, jail Bota." We had no idea what we were saying, but we were doing it nonetheless. And we felt the energy, and we knew we were part of something important. When I was in the 5th grade, my mother took my little sister and I, along with her, to protest the logging of an old growth forest in Temagami, Canada. And we were actually arrested along with my mother at a very early age. Couple other examples that stand out to me is my brother Isaiah was the victim of brutal police brutality in Toronto. And in I think it was 7th or 8th grade, my mother brought my little sister and I to court and said, it's very important that we be here, sit here in this room and support him in this fight for justice. And then, you know, in the 9th grade, my guidance counselor told me I wasn't college material. My mother was enraged, called a meeting for that. And then, you know, over the years, she worked with immigrant women, with refugee women. She worked as an executive director of a racial justice organization, and the list goes on. So in other words, here she didn't tell me that story, but look what she was modeling in the
Yes,
mix.
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that brings me back to a question to you, Minnijean. Since we're talking about different iterations of activism, give us a snapshot of your activism journey. My presumption, again, is that you started it in Little Rock. So where, when, was it inside your home, your community? Who was the person or persons that modeled activism for you? And when did you realize that activism would be a part of who you would become?
Well, you know, I think maybe we have to grow up in order to realize the kinds of resistances that were in our homes, because we don't know what's going on. And I'll tell you that among my friends, all the mothers made the children's clothes. Now, if Phyllis is on here, my sister, she
She is.
thought, she didn't know. I later discovered that that was a form of resistance, because the stores in Little Rock didn't, sometimes they allowed you to try on clothes, but mostly they were frowned upon it. So our parents, our mothers, I would say, we became wonderful seamstresses, and we're very fashionable. And I realized later that that was a form of resistance.
Hmm.
So my mom was a Girl Scout leader, a Brownie leader, and uh, a story that kind of relates. So as colored brownies, and I'll use that, we got the hand-me-down brownie uniforms. And I didn't know any difference. But all I could remember is when my own daughters became brownies, I bought them the top of the line new brownie outfit. They didn't know that this was something that was from my own life and feeling less than.
Mm-hmm.
My mom would say to me, you're going to escape this place, because this one day you're going to be able to fly away. And I didn't understand it, but I do now. I knew that it had some basic limitations on what I could be, who I could be. So I think she was preparing me to fly away, which I ended up doing. But also, we were, I think, members of junior NAACP. I was part of the federated, they were called Colored Federated Clubs. And there were things that were happening that were part of my development. There was the Dunbar Community Center, which was 3 blocks from my house, and we could talk, feel safe, even sort of organize activities. So I think maybe I'm giving a larger picture of activism as a kind of personal resistance that you have. I know that I used to get on the bus and sit in the front and get kicked off. And maybe occasionally I would drink out of a white water fountain. So to me, there's an automatic resistance living in the Jim Crow South that you're just kind of paying attention to for your life. So that's my young life. And of course, we had the Black press, and I'll give that nod to Elsie and Daisy Bates. That was important. That's a form of seeing another part of the world, which is disallowed in your setting. So there were just I don't know. But the other thing is, once you do the Little Rock thing, you can't stop me now. I don't care. I mean, you have created a monster. Okay. And I take that as an honor, because all these things are related. They have the same basis: power and power over, or power, you get to decide. I'm looking at power with, I'm looking at discussion, I'm thinking about coalitions and things like that. So, hey, they messed up when they.
And we're happy they did. Let me ask both of you a question, and this one is around 2020, the summer of 2020. What happened in the world? What happened in America? And you can address both the COVID pandemic, but more importantly, the social justice uprising that happened around the world, really, in 2020. We all witnessed it, and some people participated in it. Just give me your impressions, your analysis, your thoughts on that major happening in our world.
You go, Spirit.
Okay, I mean, my mother and I have had many very emotional conversations about this. But from a personal vantage point, and I'm sure I share this widely, was horrified, sickened, literally steeped in depression, with the consecutive back-to-back murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. One of the darkest moments. One of, there are many, and unfortunately, this was not new. The media was there. And interestingly enough, like in 1957, the media played a big role in bringing this to national attention. But I have to point out that Eric Garner was murdered in broad daylight, using very similar words, I can't breathe, just within a 5-year span, but there was a different reaction. And so I've been taking time to think about and, diving into thoughts around what is the difference. There's a podcast I really love called Code Switch. Many of you might be aware of it, focusing on racial justice and just conversations around social justice. And, they brought to light the fact that it's kind of a tipping point. People were tired of all of the sickness and the inhumane acts that Trump was inflicting on the nation and the world. And then also we're all boxed in with the pandemic. And so there's like a captive audience that we wouldn't have otherwise. And so I just think about it as like this interesting collision that allowed this outburst and uprising that would we have had otherwise, is my question, rhetorically speaking. Mm-hmm. So it's horrifying, and it still enrages me and makes me sick. And I'm so sorry that my brothers and sisters had to die for the world to see. But I'm hoping from this explosion that there's an opening in our consciousness. That's my hope.
Beautifully put.
Well, it had to happen. And it had to happen because enough is enough. And it was the most beautiful thing I've seen in many years. I was inspired and energized. And what I thought most of the time, so the theme was Black Lives Matter, but I feel as if the people who participated across cultures, classes, colors, and all that, enough is enough for them as well. And watching a failed response to COVID, realizing the high incarceration rate, I think people just felt their similarity to Black Lives Matter in a way that I think was really important. And one of the things I said at the time that the militarization of American police was about everybody, because I think there was some sense in the powers that be that people are disgruntled about the way things are. So I felt that it was a general enough is enough, and that's why it attracted so many people. Now, are we seeing the same kind of treatment in the current context of the people who were part of that display of solidarity? Are we seeing the same kind of response to the insurrectionists who went to the Capitol?
Mm.
And if I hear "that's not us" one more time, I mean, I do scream, but you can't hear me, because that kind of violence is part of the American psyche.
Mm-hmm.
In Little Rock, we experienced exactly, I mean, there's nothing, most of the time I keep that mob violence down. It doesn't come up. I can't be thinking about it every day. But when I saw those people, I said, it just brought it up, and it was the same thing. It was hatred. It was having a mind that is locked, irreverent, totally in, I call it profound intentional ignorance, but I felt the same because I saw women and men in Little Rock screaming hatred for no reason, really.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it is a form of lockedness in hate.
Mm-hmm.
And wow. So, yeah, we have to, in Cast, which is by Isabel Wilkerson, she had a quote, which I couldn't find today, from a Holocaust victim. And he said, it's when you do not speak up, that is a form of being, silence is as active as noise. And when you don't speak up, when you don't speak out, you're supporting and you're part of the problem. So those are the kinds of things that I know this is, in Little Rock, when I'm talking to kids, I say, you could have been in the mob, you could have been one of the 200 to 300 mean kids, you could have been one of the 20 nice kids, you could have been the people with the power, like the governor. And every day we get choices. Who would we be?
Mm. Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful. Let me ask you, you guys represent two different generations, and I just want to ask if how you define or perceive activism is different based on the fact that you come from two different generations, or I know you talk about it, you work together to a certain extent, you speak about it. Do you all think that your definition of activism, how you see activism, how you think it should work, is it one and the same, or is it different based on the fact that you come from two different generations?
You talk.
Okay, so I learned from you. You modeled that behavior. And I think the reason why I really took my time to articulate what you modeled is because you literally took us into these spaces. Now, as a grown person now, when I see adults bringing their children into these spaces, I always walk up to them and say, this is amazing. My mother used to drag us everywhere and we were always kicking and screaming, but it taught me so much. I remember it was Friday night and we just wanted to be with our friends. And she took us to the beach to a folk festival, my little sister Layla and I. And we were like, the whole way there, we were like joking on my mom, like, what are they gonna be like? Spoons and like banjos. And we were just like cutting up, as they say. Anyways, we were close to the event, and my mother just stopped and started weeping. And it makes me emotional right now. And she said, I need to show you what I couldn't do as a young person. I want to allow you into this world I couldn't participate in. And just such a beautiful gift to give your children, and also like profoundly powerful. So being in those spaces, taking us to those spaces, showing us, she didn't have to say you belong here. She showed us that we belonged there. I see activism as like a kaleidoscope. Recently, I happened upon this kaleidoscope made out of an old barn silo in the countryside in upstate New York. And I just was looking at these different kaleidoscopes, and I was like, this is beautiful. And it just reminded me of the analogy of activism. It comes in so many shapes and forms, ranging from art. You know, my mother had this really powerful conversation about the insanely talented poet at the inauguration, and how powerful her words are, and how they reverberate through us, and how they move us to action. I think about, as my mother said, you know, how she grew up. I really take that to heart in terms of protecting your spirit as a form of activism, the way that my granny held her head very high, and her whole entire family, and how she opened up her table to, you know, my Aunt Phyllis, who was very active in the civil rights movement, in SNCC. My uncle founded the Black United Youth. My uncle Dwight was like one of the very first Black sound engineers in Little Rock, and on to the White House. Like, why? Because she opened up her home to these young people to have these crucial conversations. Of course, my activism has evolved in different ways. And I used to think, especially when I moved to New York, that was right around the time when Eric Garner was murdered, and I was in the street. I was literally in the street. I had a bail number written on my hand just in case I got arrested. And I was out there, and I thought that this is the loudest way that I can protest, literally and figuratively. This is how I'm screaming out. And then it kind of evolved, because I've always loved the arts and education. And so I came to a point where I'm like, I have a background in media, arts, education. And so I came to settle on the fact that I can be an activist. Maybe I'll be in the streets, but I can be an activist in taking the skills and gifts and talents that I have and bring that forth. I mean, recently I had a book club, and we read Dr. Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. And one of the challenges was saying that activism, you must be provoking policy change. And so at first I took that literally, and then I thought about it, and I said, you know, I love to talk to young people about the Little Rock Nine. So I may or may not be at City Hall or at community board meetings, and I am, but when I think about the trickle effect of teaching a first grader about the Little Rock Nine or Ruby Bridges, that kid then goes home to their parents, who happens to be a judge, who then maybe that can evolve into some policy change. So I use that as an example of how we can all use our gifts and talents to make a change.
Absolutely.
Well, we have, you know, well, Janice, you're a writer, and you've written brilliant books about your family, about Daisy Bates, and about lives. That's activism. Michael, you're a photographer. I know that you see photography as activism. We saw this wonderful young poet, and so now we can, especially when I'm talking to kids, I say, what interests you? Become an activist on that. I heard an expression from Reverend Al Sharpton the other day, and he was talking about Jordan Davis's mother, who ran for Congress. And he said she turned pain. And if you don't, Jordan Davis was killed sitting in his car, and his mother ran for Congress, and she won again in the last election. And Reverend Shelton said she turned pain into power. So I've had these, I would say, don't get mad, get even, get angry and knock the top off the exam, be mad and get your degree, be mad and write music, become an environmentalist, take it seriously. So I think we have to give permission for people to act in different ways and understand that it has power as well. So there's so many ways. Whatever is interesting, if you pursue that with complete heart, you're changing the world, right? So I really, you don't have to get your head kicked in to be an activist. And I think that's really important, especially for young people to understand.
Janice, do you mind if I just
No, go right ahead.
My mother to think about a conversation we were talking about the other day, in terms of, like, you know, young people who are frustrated because they're going to school at institutions that have deeply embedded institutionalized racism and problems that kind of stem hundreds of years, and they're frustrated because they want to make a change and they want to achieve equity in these spaces, yet they're fighting up against something that has like hundreds of years of legacy invested in it. And so you and I were talking about how the fact that just going to class and saying, you know what, this right now is too big for me, and I think the best thing for me right now is to get my education.
Yes, I love that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not to turn young people away from the fight. It's just that I think that protecting your spirit and self-care and resistance can also be activism, because it's so colossal.
Save yourself for the later fight. Get ready for it.
Don't get mad, get even.
I love your
get mad and turn it into power, right?
Yes, yes. Very insightful answers. Let me ask you this question. If both of you were invited to a global planning and strategizing meeting of America's and the world's leading activists for peace and justice, and the discussion was around what should our priorities be for moving the world and America and the world forward, what would your 3 suggestions be to move us forward?
Okay, got it. Disarm, stop war, because that's where all the money, American money goes. It goes into weaponry. So that would be my first one. Stop behaving as if you're exceptional, because you're not. Okay, I get to say that to the US. You're exceptional in COVID infections and deaths, okay? You're exceptional in incarceration rates, okay? For the rest, I think these things have shown that there are very deep cracks in what we keep talking about as exceptional. And I would say you're not the king of the world. You have to work with other people, build coalitions. You know, coalitions is always the key. So people have to work with each other and stop spreading the idea that there's scarcity, because there is not. There is enough to go around if you don't keep hoarding it, right? So those are the 3 things I would say.
Those are wonderful.
That would change the world right away. It would just shift into something else.
I believe it. Spirit.
I just say ditto. No, I'm just kidding. I love that. Very powerful. I'm a huge proponent of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It doesn't have to look exactly like it looks in other countries. We have a very unique history. But as the great Jay-Z said, you can't heal what you don't reveal. But just to be serious, I think that we need to have an honest look in the mirror in the last 6 months to a year have held up a Jurassic mirror for us to see ourselves, truly who we are and what we're capable of. And I think that we need to dive deeper into that, because if we're actually going to truly have this, truthful reckoning with racial injustice, we have to know the truth of our history. We have to know how we got to this moment, because we've created a very clear path and blueprint, and it's been very meticulously engineered.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to look at that. I mean, there has been one in South Africa, in Rwanda, in Canada, there has been one looking at First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people's legacy of residential schools. I mean, with the deep rooted racism in the United States, it's imperative that we face that. The second part, I think that because I love the story of the Little Rock Nine and Ruby Bridges and, so many other stories of civil rights, young people in the civil rights movement, I think we need a huge shift in the curriculum to have that mandated into the curriculum, because the power that comes out of those conversations is incredible, and it can have such huge, colossal impact on young people, the trajectory of their lives. So those are two of the top that I would say.
Those are excellent. And I hope someone invites you guys to that global strategy meeting.
Oh, yeah.
Because those would be excellent. You guys would be wonderful. I am down to my last question, and to a great extent, you've answered it several times, but I'm going to ask you to maybe say it a different way. But I know we have some students, young people here in the audience tonight. So my question to you is, for young people who want to be a part of making things better in this world, that they're already woke, that word that we hear so much. They already understand that things have to be better, get better before everybody is on the same playing field. What kind of wisdom, what wisdom would you leave tonight for young people of how they could get involved at a young age, and what are some of the things that they could do and be activists, safe, secure, peaceful activists?
Okay. Well, first you have to be open to other people. That's the key, right? Being open to hearing, listening, paying attention. That would be the first thing. And the other thing is, one of the things that happens, say, about the Little Rock Nine is that people talk about us as heroes and heroic, but no, it was just one step to sign up to go to that school. So we have to think in terms of making change by just taking what seems to be a small step. I mean, what I really want young people to know is it's really simple. It's a small step. That's the beginning. And we can't anticipate what will happen, but I can assure them that by taking that step and being open, listening, paying attention, they become almost organically, because that's what I know about people who have been activists. They just took a step, and it turns out to be a very important step.
That first step, yes.
Yeah. And to think about working along with other people. Don't do anything by yourself, because it's not the best way. And so I get letters or emails, I guess, from people who think, my child is being bullied at school. I don't know what to do. And mostly I don't know what to do in terms of bullying, because it's pandemic, endemic, it's part of the society. But that's part of the thing of hearing your child, because most time kids don't tell you about what's happening to them. So listening is one of the most important forms of activism, is listening.
Mhm.
The second, I guess, I mean, if I'm numbering them, is thinking. I often say, I don't want you to change, I just want you to think. And when I talk about the lockedness that I feel, people locked in hate, it means you can't receive anything from outside. And so that being willing to receive things from outside is a very powerful way of being. So that's what I think.
Those are wonderful, wonderful. Spirit.
I think just, you know, where I am with it right now is encouraging young people to look at their own interests, what they're passionate about, and somehow you can use your gifts to create change, to propel your voice forward, to amplify voices, whether you're
While you
a
at
musician,
and open up my
a gymnast. I mean, the list goes on. So like looking inside to your
car.
gifts and interests and passions. Also, not to exhaust yourself too early. I saw my mother she was a part of every organization, and you know, there'd be times she just was so exhausted, just being a part of grassroots organizing and change. And you know, our parents, our elders have paid greatly. And so I think that one of the lessons we can take is like, pace yourself. Let's see. I literally had to write this down because it came today. My very good friend Trey posted on her Instagram a quote from James Baldwin. And I was like, you just gave me a whole new lease on my sanity, because it was so timely. It was John Lewis. I said James Baldwin, but I meant John Lewis because I have another quote from James Baldwin. So James Baldwin says, our crown has been bought and paid for. All we have to do is wear it. I just love that. I think it's beautiful. But Trey posted the John Lewis quote that said, pace yourself. We used to say that ours is not the struggle of one day, 1 week, or 1 year. Ours is not the struggle of one judicial appointment or presidential term. Ours is the struggle of a lifetime, or maybe even many lifetimes, and each one of us in every generation must do our part.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Well, that was my last question. And Kurt, I don't see any questions in the chat. Can you tell me whether you have any or not?
I did have a question submitted to me earlier.
Okay, there's one at the very bottom. So,
yeah. Well, let me go ahead and read the question that was submitted to me earlier this evening, and then we can get to the most recent questions on the chat. The question is from Mr. Carl Oberholzer, and I apologize if I mispronounced that, but his question is, question for Minnijean. I use history to teach lifelong lessons. From your experiences, what life lesson would you emphasize when using your story with students?
Oh, that's really easy. That's easy. You talk about kids. These were kids. That's the story. That's the Little Rock story. It's not Black history. It's American history. And it's got I go to a school in Nashville where they use the Little Rock story for a year, and they teach government, civics. It's the most American history story ever. Ever. But the major participants, the most important participants, were 14 and 15-year-olds. So that's your thing there. Because we tend, if you turn on the television, it's super people who you'll never be able to interact with. tell them, hey, this is about children. This is
Mhm.
like you. This is
Mhm.
ordinary kids.
Absolutely.
Don't get stuck in the hero stuff. Keep it as ordinary kids, right? That's,
Thank you, Minnijean.
yeah. I'm sure that's what you do.
Can I add to that? And I know this is something, you know, if we were to dive a little deeper, but I think that the concept that you were alluding to earlier in terms of silent witnesses is very important in terms of the Central High Crisis story, because that is just as relevant back then as it is today.
It's totally.
Absolutely.
Okay, and the other thing that I think is really important that I try to live my life by is the principles of nonviolence. And
Mhm.
that's really important right now because everything we see is about violence.
Mhm.
And we don't really have any models. We have a lot of models for violence, but I'm not sure how many models we have for nonviolence. And
Mhm.
it's amazing. I keep talking about going to schools, but I would go to a school and they say, oh, well, I went to a school in Northern Ireland and they said, oh my God, you won't be able to talk to these boys. I said, well, you just leave, principal who hates your students, and let me be with them. And they were wonderful. So, I mean, we have these situations where people prejudge, even those people who are educators actually prejudge their children. So I've been to schools where they have lots of slogans on the wall, and I've asked principals, I said, could you frame 5 copies of nonviolence and put them in strategic places? And then 3 or 4 months later, I get emails saying, I can't believe it. It changed my school.
Mhm.
So
Wow.
we don't think of the power of giving them some. There are only 6 of them, okay? It's so easy to think about. And they are so without models for violence. So I'm just saying, that's how I see is something really important.
That's great. That's great. Uh, there is one question from Kim Little who says, in Arkansas and around the country, legislators are trying to shut down teaching about racial oppression and activism in US history. How would you respond to that? And that's to either one of you.
My first thought is this too shall pass, okay? The reason there's so much effort is because truth is being told. It is being told in the 1619 part. It's being told by all these people who got mad and put it in getting PhDs and college degrees and writing books. And so it is a manifestation of twirling around in circles until it turns into dust or something. But it is a signal that truth is there and people are hearing it. So this is profound intentional ignorance can just keep on going, but it's not going to win.
It's great. I love that. Spirit.
I mean, I guess you could say what my mother has spoken of. I think that the more powerful the resistance, the more power there is in it. And so to see that as a signal of how powerful teaching the story of the Little Rock Nine, Ruby Bridges, you know, I just say, you know, I use these 2 stories and then of course, and on and on and on, but there is so much power in it, henceforth why there's so much resistance. So use that as a signal that we're on the right track. I know personally, I do anti-racism education, and I had a couple engagements canceled because the Trump administration outlawed any training that had the word white supremacy, anti-racism, critical race theory, and the Biden administration change that with the stroke of a pen with an executive order.
Mhm.
So, you know, the tide has changed. Of course, we need to continue to speak out about it. But yeah, I like what my mother said about the testimony to the power in it, because
Mhm.
the resistance is our beacon for that.
Yeah, but we got to have Saturday classes. We have to undo that. We are capable as societies and groups and friends we can negate that. Kids can go to school on Saturday. With the Zoom thing, it's really, really easy. So we have to put in the challenge, and it becomes exciting. We're talking about resistance. We started there early. Resistance becomes fun and it really does. Once we say, oh my goodness, we're resisting this. And I know Ohio has, they turn the schools over to the state, and the person in charge isn't an educator, but a crony. So our resistance has to be within communities. One of the things for my niece came to Ottawa on Canada Day. She's from Maryland, and she said, "Aunt Minnie, your house looks like the UN." All these different people. I said, I like it that way, and it's going to stay that way, because we're talking about issues that affect everybody, and we have to coalesce. We have to do all these things to work together. And I'm not going to have a closed mind. I'm not going to lock myself into ignorance, no matter what. So I think the challenge to expand all the different possibilities that we have is just, to me, is just the most powerful thing.
Another thing you taught me, Mother, in high school, I remember you spoke at one of my high school assemblies or a neighboring school, and the students said, well, it's not in our curriculum. And you said, you demand it. You get together, you bring together students, you get a teacher who was willing to take on this charge with you and continue to move it up and up and up. And like young people, sometimes, I know when I was young, I didn't realize how much power I had. But young people have so much power, like within their schools, also, out in the world. Like there are CEOs sitting around. This is a quote from my friend Christian Davis. He was like, do we realize that CEOs are sitting around tables and talking about what a middle schooler wants to put on their feet or their head? Like there's so much power, but we have to get the other version of why there's so much power. And so it's like, sometimes my message to young people is, unfortunately, a lot of this information is not going to be delivered to you. It's not going to be found in your classroom. You're going to have to investigate and find it out. And I feel like that's where social media and access through the internet is such a positive. The positive element of that is the fact that there is so much information out there. But unfortunately, at this point in time, because we're not given what we deserve in terms of our full education, you're going to have to go and seek it yourselves.
Exactly. Let me very quickly, Minnijean, someone very, very close to you wants you to address this, and you did a little bit before, but here in Arkansas, legislators, white male legislators in Arkansas, and Tom Cotton in Congress have written legislation to prevent teaching the 1619 Project. So would you address that and talk about, what your thoughts are about that?
That's the fear. Truth, it scares people, okay? Just freaks them right out, to the point where they put together that really shoddy 1776 document that was cut and pasted from different places. We have to be able to recognize the shoddiness of the And we have to be able to recognize this is part of the craziness. We can't let them know. So this is part of the demonstration of the fear that things have changed, will change, continue to change. And no matter how much you try to keep them the same, it doesn't matter because it's going to change anyway. So we don't, it feels horrible. I'm sorry you guys got caught. He wants to be president, and I'm not going to get into politics. But these people have ill intent. And we have to be able to recognize it and challenge it in different ways. So if they won't teach it in the school, then teach it on Saturday, okay? Teach it on Friday night. The churches have space, teach it in there. I mean, we can't to expect, I think, well, now I can't remember his name, of course, the famous, never mind. He said the master's tools cannot dismantle the master's, won't dismantle the master's house. So we know that they don't want to give up power. They do not want to give up anything. They don't want to give up spaces in university. They don't want to have good schools. They don't want a population of people who can think critically. Because if you can't think critically, then they can make you suggest that you go and storm the Capitol and that you are locked in ignorance and hate. So they can do all kinds of things. Apparently we can counter that. You know, slaves were hiding in barns and everything to learn. We can do something. We can learn ourselves. You have to. Otherwise, the whole point of trying to deny information is about disempowering, discouraging, dismissing, devaluing. So we can't.
I love that hope. You're giving us hope. Todd Allen, his question is, he said, Spirit, you were just talking about resistance. Minnijean, I've heard you speak of your time at Central and how your smile was a form of resistance. Can you tell us more about this?
Okay, so the whole point of racism is it's kind of like the ultimate bullying. It's designed to make the person feel powerless. That's what it is. I know that. I felt it. I know what it's about. And I know this, I hate to admit this, but at a certain point, you just, whatever they're saying, unless they're kicking you down the steps or spitting on you or whatever, you mostly tune out. That's their pathology, not mine. And so you tune out that stupidity and you're just thinking, oh, I'm so gorgeous. Oh, I'm so smart. And drive them crazy because their idea was that we were to be grateful and that we were to be subservient. That's the training, especially in the South, of white people and Black people. Subservience. My mama fixed me. I didn't have a subservient bone in my body. And they knew it. And I drove them crazy. And I think we all did. Because while they were spending all their time trying to think up mean things to do, Gloria, Ellen, and Carlotta We're on the honor roll, okay? So that's the thing. Tune that out and go about your project, what you're supposed to be doing. So yeah, I had the smile. I thought myself to be talented. I was tall, beautiful, and proud, and I could see that it drove them crazy. And so definitely an act. I don't really know what I was really, I don't know what I was really like, but I think Melby and I kind of knew we were drama queens, and we were totally pretending that we were just God's gift to the world. Oh, that just makes people mad.
Well, a testimony to that is there's a book called Bitters in the Honey by Dr. Beth Roy, who's a social psychologist, and she wrote an entire chapter on you and spoke to white people, women in particular, who recalled you in a way, and they described you as, you know, in a very derogatory way. And at the end of the session, she actually pulled out a picture of you and saw this ravishing young woman, and they were in shock that their psyche had created this monster. And it's really beautiful. I'm obsessed with your smile during the Central High crisis. And as you said, in 1997, I was 17 years old sitting at a press conference, and I think this is probably the first time I actually saw you snap. Like, now it's normal, but you snapped. And I was like, whoa. But I loved it because the reporter said, Minnijean, can you talk about the Chile incident and why you were expelled? And you said, no. I was expelled for being tall, beautiful, and proud. And unlike the stereotype of what a Black woman should be, a young Black woman should be. And that was like, chilling. It stuck with me ever since. And then one other Minnijeanism that I'll drop, which I think is so potent, is talking about the mob. She said they threw away their dignity and it landed on us.
Wow. That is great. That is great. I've got one, I don't know how many minutes we have.
How long are they gonna let us? You know, we could go all day if you let us.
I've got one other question, and it says, what advice would you give to us that were raised by racists to help sway our families?
I think if you know that, you're on a good track. I was in North Carolina at a university, and this young man stood up and said, my family's in the Klan. They've been in the Klan, and I know that they've done all these things. What am I supposed to do about it? I said, you just did it. You talked about it. And what happened in that room was that all these people came and hugged him. So, I mean, that's what I mean. Here's this little step that he took that he didn't know. I didn't say, get out of the Klan. You don't, I never said anything. I said, you've already done it. So we have to be kind of kind to people and give them time to think about some of their behaviors. And I would think that when I spent a long time kind of trying to figure out what happened at Central. And then not too long ago, when they were talking about monuments, they talked about how the Daughters of the Confederacy had made the history books a certain way. You couldn't talk about slavery in any way. And I remember in my history book at Central, we had a big history book and it had a paragraph about slavery, and it said, oh, there was slavery, but they were nice to them and, took them away from their primitive. It was the best thing that could happen.
Wow.
And I remember raising my hand in the history class. And I said, I find this difficult. Well, that was the beginning of the Minnijean bad girl thing. because I did have difficulty. But then I realized that's what they learned.
Mhm.
And so as thinkers and as professors and as teachers, we have to look at what our kids are learning and be thoughtful.
Yes.
Carl, you say what to teach your kids. It's not the usual sort of delusion American history, because it's not good enough.
And one thing I'll add,
Go ahead.
one thing I'll add to that is just sparked off many conversations you and I have had, is introducing the concept of unlearning, because we have been conditioned and we've been so entrenched in learning what we have been told is the truth, many myths and lies. And so how do we even begin the process to unlearn that?
Mhm.
Because to quote the great Minnijean Brown Tricky once again, you said the central high crisis lives in your body. And so it's even deeper than the education. It's like, how do we expel this trauma from our bodies as well?
Yes. Yes. Deep. Another question. Let me see. How do we get people to open hardened hearts and minds and lift the veils of their eyes and visualize the world through the lens of others?
Well, Janice, we are just witnessed
Yes.
some stuff that would tell us that let's not waste our time. I'm not going to waste my time on people who refuse to think. And that's why, like kids, that's why I like to spin.
Mhm.
I just can't, because I think obviously it doesn't work. And I am worried about people who can be so easily led.
Mm.
And I see that directly as a flaw of the American education system.
Mhm.
So there's the challenge. Get it right, folks, because a good education would disallow that, right? It really would. Because people would have a number of perspectives to think about and would be open to hearing other perspectives. I was talking to somebody who's Irish, and I said, who is current Irish, right? I said, I'm fascinated by not specifically Irish people, but people who came as immigrants years ago. When you look at those ships, they were dirty. They weren't wearing hoop skirts and playing Vivaldi, okay? They were grubby, they were hungry, and they were looking for rescue. Then why are these same people who came from those people so angry with the other people who are looking for refuge, who are seeking something? I don't know how you talk to people like that. I don't know how, because it seems an unwillingness to acknowledge your own history, personal and group history,
Mhm.
and the whole totality of the American history story itself. So I can't, I don't know how you talk to those people.
Well, that's a great answer. That's a great answer. And this has to be our last question, I'm told. And this has been fascinating, absolutely fascinating, Minnijean and Spirit. Thank you guys for letting me do this.
Well, thank you.
And Kurt, is it possible to let people turn their unmute themselves and clap? Because this has been an amazing conversation.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. I'm clapping to you guys.
Very good.
What a wonderful group. Oh my goodness.
Thank you.
Excellent, excellent, excellent.
So fun.
Thank you, thank you,
Shannon.
thank you, thank you,
Yes.
thank you.
Girl.
you. Thank you, Minnijean.
And we meet back here once a month.
That was great.
We love y'all.
I see all these people who are activists in different ways. Ellen, where are you? Ellen from Amsterdam.
Hi.
Ah,
Tell your mom I said hi.
I will. Yeah, I will.
Her mom was Gloria Ray, who was on the honor roll at Central. So she said, y'all just act a fool if you want to. I'm gonna.
That's her.
Get mad, get even.
oh my God.
You guys were wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minnijean. Great seeing
Scott's
you.
here.
And yeah, I want to make sure to thank our moderator, Janice Kearney, one more time.
Yes, thank you, Janice.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Janice.
Janice.
Thank you, Janice. Awesome,
that was
awesome. What a blessing. So
Thank you so
encouraging.
much, Janice. Thank you. It's been
Great
so,
question.
it feels very much like home. And so
I
thank you
know,
for
it was wonderful.
In
beautiful questions.
Arkansas, y'all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Shannon Boshiers, thank you so much
Shannon.
for bringing this all together. Kurt Leftwich, thank you so much. Robin White and staff and team at Central High National Historic Site. My Aunt Phyllis for always holding us down in Little Rock. Representing
Yeah.
and so many other family and friends who have joined with us tonight. Thank you.
Peter.
Sylvia.
Thank you, everyone. Okay.
Yeah.
We love y'all.
Thank you for
Thank
coming.
you,
Thank you very much for
Spirit.
coming and
You
engaging.
inspire me, okay?
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Good
Love you
night. God
guys.
bless.
Love you guys.
Thank you
Bye.
so much, all of
Oh,
you.
right, right.